Good morning. Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Lorena Rodriguez, and I'm the captain at Sheriff's Information Bureau. Today, Sheriff Alex Villanueva will discuss the severe impacts of the department's staff shortages and defunding. It is now my honor to present the Sheriff of Los Angeles County, Alex Villanueva.
Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. Good morning, everyone. And I'm accompanied here by my command staff, or a portion of my command staff. And before we start, we want to give a farewell and a good farewell to a well-deserving employee as Deputy Morgan Arteaga, who is moving on to greener pastures in Detective Bureau. So definitely a thank you to you for a job well done. All right, and but now we got to go to some nasty stuff. Let's go there. Defunding has consequence, and that is the whole point. We're now in a strange place in the department's history. Through the 172 years that we've been in operation, where 170 years that the Board of Supervisors has been around, I think they go back to 1852. The Board of Supervisors, even though they disagree with the sheriff, but the composition of the board was such that on every single budget, year after year, there was an agreement that public safety was a priority for the supervisors, reflecting the will of the people. But over the last few years since I've taken office, that has changed radically. And hit it. When I say defunding has consequences, see this number right now? That is the total sworn vacancies as we speak, 783. That number is going to grow to over 927 in the matter of the next by April 1st. That is the lowball estimate is 927. As you can see, deputy sheriff, sergeant, lieutenant, these are critical positions, all of them. These are the positions that man our patrol stations, the courts, our jail facilities, detective division in particular, and all of these are first responders and relate directly to maintaining and improving public safety and handling the crises as they arise. And patrol stations alone, these are the 4 patrol divisions. They average 70% across the board, the impairments. So when you take out the people that are vacant, the impairments loaned to other units, because again, the hiring freeze that we were working under, that leaves us with 70% of our personnel operating when we need 100%. So that means that 70% has to work overtime to cover the 100%. Detective division alone, 794 budget positions. They have 75%. They have a quarter of all detectives are missing in action. Again, this has consequences. Now, contract cities, we have 42 contract cities, the College Bureau and Transit Services. They pay for a certain level of staffing. And because we're being under, our budget is frozen, our hiring is frozen, and the vacancies are starting to mount. Now, as you can see, the overtime they're going to be spending, this jump here of over 12 million, that is directly related to the vacancies imposed by the hiring freeze. So the contract cities and our handling the budget, we're bearing the brunt of the hiring freeze. It negatively impacts our budget. Overtime overall, as you can see, from fiscal year to fiscal year, look at we actually knocked off $100 million in overtime. We went through some serious reorganizing, made the organization leaner, more effective, but it came at great expense. But now, with the hiring freeze and those budgeted positions missing and the vacancies, now we're going to jump back up way over 200 million, strictly because of the vacancies. Go ahead. Now let's put this in perspective. From 2012-13 going up to 21-22, this is the overall county budget in billions. As you can see, it's steadily rising, but what do you notice is the Sheriff's Department budget is barely budging. In fact, if you look at, I think it was this year, right around here, it was 2018-2019, that was 11.85% of the county's total budget was devoted to the Sheriff's Department operating budget. Now it's shrunk to 8.9% and falling. And these are alarming numbers. And keep that number in mind, because now let's go to the next one. Okay, this is net county cost. This is a portion of the budget, which is basically the general fund of the department, and how much of it is devoted to the sheriff's department's operation. And you can see the net county cost is rising, and again, R is actually decreasing. Now we're down to 1.6 from 1.8. We're going down to 1.6. That's a swing of 200 million right there in net county cost. And to put this into proper perspective, let's go to the next one. Riverside County, 38% of net county cost. Orange County, 25%. Ventura, 32%. San Bernardino, 22%. These are all the counties that surround us. In LA County, 16% of net county cost. So that means that the Board of Supervisors over the last few years has built up a gargantuan fudge fund, for lack of a better terms, in all these pet projects, alternatives to incarceration, Office of Diversion and Reentry, and now the newest monstrosity called the Justice, Care, and Opportunities Department, also known as We Just Don't Care Department, where they're just dumping money. They're taking out of the Sheriff's Department budget. Measure J was ruled unconstitutional, but they're sidelining that money. They're throwing it into that department, and they're producing nothing out of it while they're starving our department of the funds necessary to keep people, deputies out there in patrol on the streets, keep detectives working and handling their caseload, which is getting bigger and bigger. So, again, this falls on the shoulders of the board. Let's go to the next one. Academy classes. 2018, when I took over, the board was struggling, and my predecessor was struggling to hire personnel. And every class that they had was basically half empty because they could not get people to apply for the job. They hired consultants. They spent millions of dollars on consultants and experts to figure out how to solve the problem. Well, we solved it in one day. And one is, don't be a jerk of an employer is the number one thing, because word spreads. And now we had 2019, 22 academy classes. We hired 1,100 deputy sheriff trainees that year. So overnight, we fixed the problem. And what was the response from the board? Well, we can't have that. So they cut it down to 7. And then let's cut it down to 3. It takes a minimum of 8 academy classes just to maintain the staffing levels of the department where we don't lose any. A minimum of 8. So imagine what happens when we're down to 3. We're in the middle of a crime wave right now. 94% increase in homicides in 2 years. And what is the board doing? Let's remove deputies from the field. Let's remove detectives from working. Let's start closing down the jails. Let's set aside $40 million for the jail closure implementation team. All these things that are absolutely incomprehensible that they're doing in the face of the struggles of the community out there that is suffering, and our ability to actually provide that public safety to the community is being severely impaired directly by the decisions of the Board of Supervisors. This is unsustainable at any level. And remember, we're already facing, go to the next slide, over 927, we already know that come April 1st. And remember, they removed 1,281 positions from our budget in the previous fiscal year, 20 to 21. So over 2,208 sworn and professional staff missing will be gone right in the middle of a crime wave. Imagine that. You look at what New York City did. Look at Minneapolis, Chicago, San Francisco, Austin, Texas, Oakland, the city of LA. They all experimented with and toyed with the idea of defunding to satisfy all the activists running around, and then they lived to regret it. Every single jurisdiction turned around and refunded. The President of the United States, in his State of the Union address, said, don't defund, fund law enforcement. In fact, he said it 3 times. But that memo still has not got to the Board of Supervisors. They're still doubling down on this. That's just going to hurt people. People literally are going to die on the streets for lack of us being able to intervene to stop crime or to solve crime that has already happened. Go ahead. Just to prove a point, look at firearms-related arrests from our department alone. That number keeps growing and growing. Look at that from here, 2017 to 2021. And half of those arrests we're seeing now are ghost guns. So the fact that the streets are they're swimming with bad guys with guns, every arrest we make, that's one less crime that's going to occur. One less homicide, one less assault with a deadly weapon, one less robbery. So it does have an impact, but when we cannot make these arrests for lack of personnel, or you're going to see for lack of being able to test all these firearms and use our crime lab as intended, remember this, 94% increase in homicides, and this is where we're at for 2022. But let's separate that down into divisions. Go ahead to the next one. This is our patrol divisions, and this is by supervisors. Notice District 2. We're seeing an increase again from 21 to 22. When we close 21 with a 94% increase, we still have an increase here. And this is very troublesome. So what is going to happen here? And strangely, the supervisor here, Mitchell, is the one who swore not a single more dime, another dime to the Sheriff's Department. So very curious. I'll go on to the next. Remember the staffing issue? During the curtailments, our Scientific Services Bureau, which is our crime lab, 22 positions removed. And look at who they are. All these positions, photographer, lab technicians, document examiners, identification specialists, latent prints, supervising criminalists, supervising forensic criminalists, senior criminalists. These are all the people that do all the hard work of solving crimes. The CSI. Imagine the Hollywood of the CSI, but there's just no CSI. Well, that's the rate that the county is going right now. And here's the impact when all these people are missing. Look at the backlog of firearms and ballistics submission. DNA backlog. Homicide and evidence collection increase. When you have a 94% increase in homicides, that means there's 94% increase in crime scenes that have to be processed. Evidence has to be collected. Evidence has to be processed and figured out. That's DNA, that's fingerprint, all the forensic stuff, all the ballistics from firearms, toxicology backlog. All these things are important. On the toxicology side alone, that means people that are involved in DUIs that result in someone's death, and they walk out of jail waiting on the results of the toxicology. And imagine someone gets killed while we're waiting on the results of this. That's bad news. All right, keep going. Consequences from all this defunding. Well, you got overworked deputies, the potential of someone working multiple shifts. In fact, let me spell it out. Our threshold to work overtime anywhere on the department used to be 96 hours a month. That is 12 extra shifts a month, 8-hour shifts. We had to raise that ceiling to 120 hours. Now we're up to 15 shifts a month that you can work. You used to be able to only work 12 days in a row. Now that number is increasing to 30 days in a row because we just do not have the personnel. And that is going to be harmful because workers' comp claims are going to increase, mistakes are going to happen, fatigue is going to set in, and someone's going to wrap their car around a telephone pole or something on their way home just for being dead tired. Imagine working all those hours, working a double, a single, a double, single, double, and then in between that, oh, by the way, you got to go to court if you're working patrol. That is, you're burning the candle on both ends. Detective caseload, it's getting too big, which means the bad guys are still out there because the detectives have not had the time to put the case together and get that search warrants, get the arrest warrants, get those Ramey warrants, and get people yanked out of the street that have been accused of committing crimes, but for lack of enough detectives, well, they're going to still run free. So you already know about the crime lab, and imagine being a victim of crime or relatives of victims if they're homicides. They don't see their cases progressing satisfactorily. Why? Because of lack of personnel. And victims of theft, the chances of them being reunited with whatever was stolen from them is diminishing. Okay. Now, George Washington Bridge scandal. A few folks remember that from a few years back. Federal government faced tough questions at the Supreme Court, defending criminal penalties leveled against public officials who shut down access lanes to the George Washington Bridge in 2013 for political retribution. What you're seeing now with the Board of Supervisors is political retribution, because my name is not Jim McDonald, it's Alex Villanueva. The only reason they're doing this is retribution against me and the Sheriff's Department to harm me for political reasons, and they have no legal or moral justification for it. They cannot claim poverty. They cannot claim that everyone has to tighten their belt because they're sitting on a $2.4 billion surplus. The word I understand is that they're waiting out the results of the election in June. They're in disarray, and maybe come November, they'll come around to decide something. Well, by that point, we'll be 2,300 in the hole, 24, 2,500. Where does this end? We have to stop the bleeding. We need to have more academy classes starting up right now, because every class that I hire now, assuming I can hire them right now, it's going to take me at least 10 months just to get them working in the jail. And that pushes deputies in the jails out to patrol. It pushes people in patrol to the specialized units. And that feeds the entire pipeline. The Board of Supervisors knows this willingly. They shut down the entire pipeline for political retribution. Nothing different than the governor that engineered this back in New Jersey. The only difference is we're not inconveniencing people in traffic. We're actually harming people, and we will cause an increase in deaths as a result of this, and injury and misery on the county. So, who needs to be spoken to about this? Well, here's the main person right here, Hilda Solis. She wants to convince her new district that she deserved another term in office. That's up to them. It's not up to me. But because she is one of the main architects of the defunding behind Mark Ridley Thomas, she needs to be asked that question. Why are you continuing to maintain a hiring freeze on the Sheriff's Department? There's 37 county departments. Our department is the only one with a hard hiring freeze for both sworn and civilian staff. And adding 2 more classes is not going to cut it. Now we have to add 8 more classes just to save the ground that we've lost. The one principal, Holly Mitchell, District 2, where all the deaths and all the mayhem is occurring by and large, and she thinks less cops is better. So I need to ask her that question. Lift the hiring freeze. And the third person, Sheila Kuehl. She's exiting stage left, but these 3 are the fundamental 3. They're insisting on the hiring freeze and defunding the Sheriff's Department. The other 2 supervisors we're not mentioning, they've actually indicated they want to lift the hiring freeze, so good for them. That's a step in the right direction, but we need a lot of action to happen now. We cannot wait till June. We cannot wait till November. And so that's where we're at. Any questions?
Sheriff, talk about contract cities. Are there specific, is there specific language in the contract cities contracts that say they have to have a certain level of service?
Yes, the contracts are paid by minutes. And if we cannot supply the minutes, and we have to operate at least 98% of what they contracted for, anything less than 98%, they are actually eligible for a refund of their money. We're not able to satisfy the contract. Now, we've met with the leadership of the Contract Cities Association, and I'm encouraging them to seek legal action against the Board of Supervisors because they are the reason why they're interfering with the contract. It's pretty, math is pretty simple. If I can't hire the bodies, I can't get the deputies out to work patrolling their contract city to meet the minutes. At some point, I run out of people. We're at that point that we've ran out of people.
Countywide, what is the average response time now?
Countywide, the average response time is good. It's at 3 minutes in the basin. And I can't say the same for Lancaster Palmdale only because it's so remote everything. But for the basin, it's averaging 3 minutes on a response, code 3 lights and sirens.
And does that, could that change if staffing is not?
Oh yes, it's going to change. That 3 is going to become 4. It's going to become 5. In the high desert, that might become, instead of 10 minutes, code 3, it might become 20. And these are life or death emergencies, but if we don't have the people, we just don't have the people. There's no around it.
Toxicology, you were talking about the science services. How much of the work do you do versus what the coroner's office does?
When it's the crimes, we actually do that.
So you do the toxicology in-house?
We do the toxicology for the arrests that we make for like DUI, drunk driving, manslaughter ones, all those. We do those. The coroners, they do their own toxicology based on their autopsies.
Okay.
But everything that's not autopsy is crime scene. It's our department's responsibility.
What are the chances that the feds can intervene with any kind of a consent decree or something? Do you think it's going to get bad enough that it'll warrant the feds to intervene on what's going on?
We're actually seeking that federal intervention on the custody side because there's 3 different consent decrees that pretty much mandate what we need to do in custody. The board is interfering with the federal mandates now. So We're working with the California State Sheriff's Association, and we'll be intervening on the federal side for custody operations. And that is a start.
Thank you.
Sheriff, in terms of the allocation of resources that you do have, you know, you said in the past that you've beefed up the CCW unit,
Mhm.
and yet you have had to cut 25% of your homicide detectives. Can you explain why the CCW unit was determined to be more important than, you know, homicide investigators at a time when there's a need for, like you said, increase in homicide?
Well, it's pretty simple. When I don't have people out there, the CCW actually allows people to legally be armed in public and to defend themselves. If I'm losing personnel, I don't want to leave people stranded without any means of defending themselves. This is pretty basic. And the homicide unit is by attrition. This is a war of attrition. And that 25% is for all of detective division, not just homicide.
Sheriff, I'm assuming you've talked to those three individuals personally, and what have they said to you, you know, when you've told them your case?
They're not saying anything at all. We've talked with the CEO, Frisia Davenport. We've presented all this information, and all we're getting is we'll get back to you. And they're going to play this we'll get back to you game past June, past November, in hopes that somehow I'm not the sheriff, I guess, is their plan. But their willingness to do that political game at the expense of the public safety is just astonishing. Not something I'm used to, or I don't think anyone can wrap their mind around, but that's an answer or question that those three supervisors need to answer. Sir?
Could I just ask a separate question? I was gonna wait till everyone else is done
Oh.
with this, but it's about the controversy over the radio show on KFI.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say something about that? Because there's a complaint about it.
Well, there's a complaint of someone who wants attention, and but we conform to all the rules, FPPC, FCC, and we rely on KFI to do the exact same thing and conform to the regulations. Multiple candidates have already been on KFI in other show, I think the Mo Kelly show, and it works fine. And I think that individual in particular, for some strange reason, he thought that putting a press release was the same thing as asking KFI, hey, I need to equal time on the show. So I think that's just a reflection of a failed candidacy, nothing more.
And back to this issue,
Yes.
is there a consent decree right now that mandates certain things? Because I didn't know that, and that's, if you could
Oh,
explain.
yes. There's 3 different consent decrees. In fact, Brandon, could you elaborate on the 3 real quickly?
Well, yes, sir. There's technically,
Could you identify yourself and your rank, please?
yes, sir. My name is Brendan Corbin. I'm the Assistant Sheriff over Custody Operations. So we do have 2 consent decrees and a settlement agreement. The primary one that the sheriff's referring to is a federal on behalf of mentally ill and housing for mentally ill inmates. That one is under Judge Pragerson on federal court, and there's a federal monitor that monitors us on that. They are actually right now, the monitor is trying to want a status conference with the judge to see where we're at with it, because we can't satisfy a lot of what we want to do requires specialized housing, which the jail closure will take away. Second one is the Rosas lawsuit that the ACLU brought us against us for force in the basin facilities. And then third is Johnson for ADA.
How close are you then, and whether it's you or the sheriff again, but you're talking about having the feds intervene or help you out, how close are you to getting some sort of an answer from them or some action?
We've been trying to confer with them prior to initiating litigation, but the county now is in disarray. They fired the chief county counsel, I think De Castro Silva, and so we're really not getting a good answer from them, and we need to move on because we have programs that we have to meet, requirements from the consent decrees we have to meet, and we're failing not from any action of our own, but specifically because the hiring freeze and the defunding efforts is putting us in a no compliance situation with all 3 of the consent decrees, and that's just not acceptable. I'm going to give you a prime example of how petty politics the county is right now. We have a gentleman, Phil Teramoto, 30-plus year veteran of the scientific services, firearm examiner, probably one of the best in the entire western United States. He retired 2 years ago. He was willing to come back on what's what they call 120-day rehires, and they work from retirement, and they work maximum of 120 days a year, sorely needed to resolve the backlog of firearms and ballistics. And the CEO refused to rehire him. And it's like, it's absolutely insane not to hire this person back who's willing to come out of retirement to resolve the workload. And if you recall, Joe Purcell, the homicide investigator, who on his own, when they froze the cold case unit from funding, and he solved a cold case murder on his own, working for free, because he's that committed to the job. I mean, we have the best in the business, but if we can't pay them at some point, we're just losing the capacity. It's walking away.
For context, how long does it take for someone you hire to become a deputy?
Someone to hire a deputy, at the moment they file the application to get hired is about 6 months on average, assuming they have a normal, they weren't all over the world, and they're older. Say a young kid out of college, 6 months. From there to be in the custody, off training, is about a 10-month lag, right there. And that's for just a standard deputy. So I could say, yeah, I'm going to hire you today. I don't see you working in the jails until 10 months down the road. So every time that, as everyone keeps retiring, which they are because they're aging out, and I'm not replacing them, my numbers are just shrinking. In fact, they're nosediving right now. So this is why we're sending out the alarm. And for the firearms investigators and the lab technicians, it takes a minimum of 3 years of training to be fully certified to be a firearms examiner. To be a full lab tech in the crime lab is 5 years. We have not hired a single person in the crime lab in 3.5 years.
Two more questions.
How long does it take to become a detective, a homicide detective?
Homicide detective, that's about a 20-year process right there, because you have to work custody, you work patrol a minimum of 4 years. Then from there you go on to become a station level detective, for example. You do another 4 years there. Now you're 12 to 15 years into your career. At that point, then you start becoming competitive to become a homicide investigator. And on average, around 15 to 20 year mark is when people get to homicide. And they'll spend the remainder of their career as homicide investigators, and they'll retire, 32 years, 35, some even up to 40 years on. And that group of investigators are the most senior on the department, them and arson explosives, and it's a job that's it's a calling, really. So I tip my hat for people that do that type of work. And if we're not feeding the pipeline people that are going to start being mentored by them and replacing them, we're losing institutional knowledge, we're losing the expertise. And that's just crippling our capacity to fight crime, solve crime, and hold people accountable in jails when they do get arrested.
One more? A while back, your department investigated the allegations out of Compton Station, and now I'm not asking about the lawsuits, I'm asking about your investigation. What was the outcome? Were there transfers and terminations? I've reported that you identified how many people have click tattoos. Can you share those figures?
If I recall, out of the investigation, 2 people ended up being terminated. I believe 13 were transferred out of the station. And we did determine, however, that the name that was used was actually created by an attorney and was never used on the department at all. No one had any knowledge of that name. That was coined by a trial attorney.
And how about how many people had the tattoo associated with them?
I don't have that number.
But you guys did look into that?
Yes, they did.
Can you get that for me at some point?
Yeah, we can try to find that for you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody in Spanish? Right. All right, we're good. All right, thank you.